Today in Agronomy on KFIL AM 1060 with Pioneer Field Agronomist Allie and Josh Schaffner. Here's Josh and Allie.
Good morning, Southeast Minnesota. Today is June 9th. This is episode number 73. Josh, so really hot across the area. So I would say we're maybe just going to start with a nice update of where we're sitting GDU-wise locally, and then just kind of progressing that conversation into other considerations as we look at this extreme heat down the stretch. Kind of a unique season. Obviously, we started this growing season with very abnormally dry and cool conditions, so we weren't really accumulating many GDUs a day. And then now as we progress, from this past weekend on, obviously we're picking up a lot of heat. But if we just look at the GDUs for, say, close to the Preston area, since April 14th, we've picked up about 465 GDUs. I don't have how far that maybe puts us above the average. We should be a touch above the average there. Mm-hmm. And then rainfall, obviously we're sitting at about like 7, almost 8 inches. But certainly, as we all know, there are the abnormally dry parts of Southeast Minnesota on the drought monitor now, and those that are also in the moderate drought zone. So we know that moisture is becoming kind of the name of the game. But just, your take on this heat that's to come.
Yeah, it's been a unique stretch here. And, I think if we look at that GDU number, that's about 68 ahead of normal from that date, which if you do think back to April and May, by no means were we warm. There's a couple warm days in there, but GDU accumulation was really slow. And you think about, taking 25, 30 plus days to get some of the corn on the ground. So it took a long time just to, collect the GDUs just to get to emergence, which usually takes in the ballpark of 120-ish. Depends on some hybrid differences there too. But so it's really kicked into gear, and great to see that accumulation, and definitely quite a stretch here. It isn't very often in June we string together a heat stretch like this, and kind of looking at the 15-day Allie, I don't think there's a huge amount of relief. Some days that might just stay into the 80s, but it looks like we'll at least be in the mid 80s here for at least another 15 days. And I think as we come back next week and maybe a week beyond there, that plus 68 is going to climb into triple digits and probably be at 200 here in a couple of weeks, potentially at the pace we're going. But it's interesting. You don't want to be doom and gloom. I mean, it definitely, I think it's all in our mind, this heat and moisture stress. Hopefully we can get some moisture here, some change in the year and get a little bit of relief there. But, on the flip side, if we do continue with this kind of heat without some moisture, we're going to start to probably see the crops show that a little bit here in time. I think we can hang on for a little while here yet, but it'll be interesting to see how we think about that a week from now when we get back together for the next episode.
Yeah. And I think too, so just, maybe from a crop progression standpoint, you'd figure you're probably adding a leaf collar every 3 days with this hot forecast. And I think the only thing good about, we talked about that slower like May growth pattern would be that that could prevent us from stretching this corn too much this growing season, getting it too tall. So maybe these two will eventually even themselves out, but certainly we'll be keeping our eye on it. Josh, another popular topic of conversation across the area is just, looking for some commentary around the frost recovery. Obviously, we had a lot of calls last week, specifically on no-till soybean acres that in a lot of cases did require some replant. But the corn, obviously, we know that growing point was below the ground, but we did, that frost did melt those plants, maybe all the way down to the ground in some cases, or just partially melted them. So just maybe a recovery update on what some of that new growth looks like between the two.
Yeah, it's, kind of the roller coaster, continues. And I know we've missed a couple episodes the last 4 weeks here, Allie, just from, I got really bombarded with some of the crusting thing. And then the frost situation would have been a week ago. Saturday was unforeseen. I know we're sitting here talking about this heat wave we're in, and it's kind of crazy that, 10, 12 days ago we froze, we were really cold and definitely didn't maybe see that coming. And really had a bigger impact than a lot of us thought. If you kind of look at the low temperatures at night, if you're really watching it, you maybe weren't too nervous about it. If you got up that morning looking around, it's like, hey, there ain't much frost. I think we'll be good. But then as things progressed, we really saw, especially the no-till soybeans and even corn that was no-till, probably get hit the hardest. Was cold enough to definitely, take out some soybeans and kill them. And like you mentioned, the replant, we had, several thousand acres of replant in Southeast Minnesota. And of just our stuff, which, I don't know what the total number was, but, it was a pretty big number when you put it all together, which was unfortunate. The other thing that was really frustrating, Ellie, was the freeze was really uneven. So sometimes within a field, it was areas were good, areas are bad, which was really frustrating, especially in no-till or with some cover crop. It was just hard to pick those areas out as you go and scout that. So it's kind of a really complicated thing. So we had to do some patchwork, some supplements, some total replants. Corn was impacted pretty hard too. There may or may not be a little bit of replant on corn in some really severe situations. But for the most part, the corn is starting to recover. It was melted down. So it took literally, you're not feeling even remotely good about it till about yesterday or today, which that's just how long it takes, which is kind of frustrating. But, a little bit of a setback. It may or may not have a big yield impact, depending on how we recover and the GDU accumulations here. But, definitely an unforeseen thing, and just kind of another small little bump in the road here of kind of just the way this growing season has been so far.
Yeah, and certainly as folks are out making their final assessments, and we are as well, don't hesitate to reach out as you need our help just making those final decisions here. Outside of that, as we come back from break here, Josh, we're just going to talk a little bit more about maybe what some of these side dress applications will look like for us, considering some of the dry in the forecast.
Welcome back, listeners. Allie, segment one, we kind of talked about, a couple of big topics here the last week. Obviously, the GDU accumulation, which is a great thing this time of year. Again, we talked a little about moisture, but the corn has really perked up, and being ahead on GDUs, and if we continue to stay ahead, it really kind of sets up our season to hopefully not have a lot of GDU issues down the stretch, and hopefully having a drier crop. So always a good thing, but with that, the crop is progressing fast. So if we think about kind of those next big steps, I think for the most part, a lot of guys are through the corn on a herbicide standpoint. Still a few things to get wrapped up there, but I think we got a lot of that done. And now we've kind of entered that side dress window. And as we think about the hot and dry conditions, what are some things we want to be thinking about, Allie, as we start making these applications?
Yeah. So for starters, you talk about the hot and dry. And so when we look at making these applications, obviously, I think the first time that comes to mind is how much of that application are we going to actually utilize, or how much are we going to lose from the situation, knowing that we don't have moisture in the profile. So I think you can look at this from a lot of different ways, knowing that a lot of folks are using, different forms for their side dress applications. But I think if we work ourselves down the line, the most concerning that I think we want to make some recommendations around, let's start maybe on the dry urea side of things, work our way to UAN, and then maybe talk about what that looks like for folks with anhydrous side dress applications.
Yeah. So I think the first thing, and this has come up a little bit of, should we delay applications? And that's probably been a couple of questions I've had. Should we kind of wait it out and see if the forecast improves? And that's kind of a catch-21, of, we talked about this with freeze and herbicide. I think we had this conversation, Allie, probably back in late April, early May there when we were planting and we were getting dry there too. And should we, spray our pre's if we don't get moisture, that might not work. And we're kind of in the same thing here with the side dress. And my take is going to be the same now as what it was then. I would stay the course with what your game plan is, because you just never know, when you might get a shower, when that weather could change. But the big thing with urea, I think we just have to be utilizing a urease inhibitor like Agritane, probably at the high rates, to try to get us up to that 14 days of protection to try to protect that investment. And hopefully within that time we can get a shower, which historically, I'd say in Southeast Minnesota, it ain't very often we go 14 days with no moisture, but, we'll just have to see what shakes out. And even on the UAN side, if we're doing some banding there or a wide drop, I would even consider probably adding the urease inhibitor to that as well. Just from a standpoint, there's a percentage of that nitrogen that's pretty vulnerable. And we usually don't knife that stuff in too deep. A lot of times we're a coulter or dribbling on top of the ground with a wide drop machine. So I think that could still be a really good investment. And, some things we got to be looking at. And the other thing, if we delay, especially dry, Ellie, is if that corn gets bigger, we have more risk of getting urea down in the whorl, which, can lead to some burn. Usually not a huge yield limiting thing, but if we can avoid crop response on anything we're doing, I think it's probably, a good thing to avoid that negative crop response.
Yeah, no, that's a good reminder there, because I oftentimes get questions on the dry of how far could I push that application. So just, looking at, like you said, just important to remember that you can't try and outguess the weather. So get in and make those applications with the same plan that you had considering. And another thing to remember, what's nice too about the situation we are across most operations. Should you get into a situation where we feel like we lost too much of that nitrogen, a lot of utilization of Y drop these days. So hopefully you could track down a rig that could help you out as we push a little later into the season. I'm backtracking a little bit here, Josh, but I did just want to bring up, with this hot weather, I have had a few questions on some of these post herbicide applications. Are we concerned about any injury around those? And one thing to remember too, with this recent heat and surge in temperatures, we might start to see some of the rapid growth syndrome, which does not disturb or hurt yield. But sometimes we can maybe confuse the rapid growth syndrome with something we feel like was an onset from a post herbicide application. Any comments around that?
Yeah. I'll take it one step at topic at a time there. The herbicide applications, if we still have some left on corn, I think the big thing, just depending on what you're spraying, there are some products that as you get to 11-inch corn, like acetochlor, we got to be getting those wrapped up. And the other thing, just be careful with your surfactant loads. It's probably been the big thing I've been encouraging growers is, if you're spraying products with glyphosate and like a grass residual, like metolachlor or acetochlor, you could probably almost leave your surfactants out is probably what I would recommend to do. If you are using it, maybe cut the rates in half a little bit just to be safe, especially if you got those two in combination, just because you're getting a pretty good surfactant load with acetochlor and glyphosate. Now, if you're in some conventional products or other things, the surfactants are probably going to still be really important, but just talk to your local, agronomist or your chem representative of what the best way to go about that is in these kind of conditions. And then the second part, what was your second question? I was rambling on about that one, Allie. I'm not sure.
Oh, so I was just reminding that we might start to see some rapid growth syndrome.
Oh, yeah.
With this recent surge and just this rapid rate of growth in the corn. So sometimes we'll receive a lot of calls on that when we do start to see that bright yellow leaves start coming out. So just a reminder to you that there can be a genetic component to it, but really it's just rare that plants would not recover from being wrapped or rolled. So it's just that new leaf coming out.
Yep. Yeah, that'll be something I'm guessing in a week to 10 days, we'll probably see that driving across the area. And if we see more of it, Allie, we can talk about that on next week's episode. But thanks for joining in, and we'll see you all next week.
You've been listening to Today in Agronomy on KFIL AM 1060. If you've missed part of the show or want to hear more, check out the show page at kfilradio.com or with the 103.1 KFIL app. Stay connected with Allie and Josh on Twitter. It's at AllieGWise, WISE, and at Josh Schaffner to submit your questions for the show. Tune in next Wednesday for the next Today in Agronomy on KFIL AM 1060.